Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to the grand ballrooms or the heroic battlefields, but into the drafty, smelly corners of a medieval castle. You're not the king, draped in velvet, nor the knight, gleaming in polished steel. You're the fool, and right now, you're standing in a massive, echoing hall. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat and unwashed bodies, and the light from the flickering torches casts long, dancing shadows that make the gargoyles on the high walls look like they're laughing at you. You can feel the weight of your ridiculous motley outfit, a patchwork of vibrant colours that scream for attention, and the bells on your cap jingle with every nervous twitch. Your stomach is a tight knot of anxiety because your entire existence hinges on one thing: making the king laugh. You probably won't survive this career path, and even if you do, your bones will probably ache from all the tumbling and your soul will be worn thin from the constant performance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, post your location and local time in the comments so we can all drift off together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a deep breath, and the smell of stale ale and wood smoke fills your lungs. You're a jester, a professional fool, and your station in life is a precarious one. You stand just outside the high table, a privileged position, yet one that puts you at the absolute bottom of the court's pecking order. You have a seat, yes, but it's often a stool by the door, a place where you can be seen and heard, but not truly included. The irony isn't lost on you. You are the center of attention, yet you are an outcast. Your job is to poke fun at everyone, including the king. But this freedom of speech is an illusion. The laughter you provoke is a shield, but a flimsy one. The wrong joke, the wrong look, and your privileged perch can become a literal gallows. Historians still argue whether the jester's immunity was a genuine, unspoken rule or just a convenient myth that made their jobs seem less terrifying. The truth is, your social status is an enigma. You are a servant, but you are not bound by the same feudal obligations as a serf. You have the ear of the king, yet you possess no land, no title, and no real power. You are a free-roaming satellite in a fixed orbit. The very nature of your profession is to be unpredictable, to exist outside the rigid structure of medieval society. But that very flexibility is also your greatest weakness. You can be dismissed at a moment's notice, and your reputation is your only currency. If a nobleman loses his land, he still has his name. If you lose your patron's favor, you have nothing. It's a bit like being a modern-day influencer. One viral post and you're on top of the world. One scandal and you're back to square one. But with the added bonus that your scandal might lead to your head being on a pike. One mainstream historical fact about your role is that jesters often lived in the castle itself, but in separate, less lavish quarters. A physical representation of their liminal status. A quirky tidbit is that some jesters were paid not in coin, but in clothing and food scraps from the royal table, which only highlights their fundamental lack of independence. The king's court is a viper's nest of political intrigue, and you, the fool, are the one person everyone trusts just enough to be near, but not enough to truly confide in. And so you stand, your bells jingling, your heart pounding, waiting for the king to glance your way and signal that it's time to perform. The spotlight is on you, figuratively speaking, since the only light you're getting is the hazy glow of a sputtering torch. You feel a familiar, creeping dread. It's not the fear of physical harm, not yet, anyway, but the soul-crushing exhaustion of having to be funny on command. You've heard the whispers, the snide remarks from the nobles who think your life is a non-stop party of jests and good food. Look at the fool, they'll say. He has no responsibilities, no land to manage, just to make us laugh. They don't understand the psychological pressure, the burden of constant humor. Your job is not to wait for inspiration, it's to manufacture it, to pull comedy out of thin air, day in and day out. There is no such thing as a sick day for a jester. If you're feeling a bit under the weather, if your back is aching from a clumsy tumble you took yesterday, or if you simply haven't slept, you still have to be on. The king's mood is your barometer, and a sour face from him means your performance needs to be twice as good, and twice as fast. You're a one-man comedy show with a very demanding audience who also has the power to take your head off. It's a bit like a modern stand-up comedian. But imagine if a heckler could literally throw you in the dungeon. You're always observing, always listening. The smallest bit of gossip, the tiniest argument between two dukes, it all goes into your mental notebook, ready to be polished into a joke. You're a walking, talking archive of courtly life. A one-person news network. Your humor isn't just about making people giggle, it's about holding a mirror up to them, a warped, funny mirror. But a mirror nonetheless. You have to be smart, quick, and possess a near-encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's quirks and follies. It's a high-stakes memory game played in real time. This intellectual labor is what most people don't see. They just see the silly clothes and the slapstick. They don't see the hours you spend thinking, crafting, and practicing. You are a genius in disguise, and that disguise is what protects you, but also what cages you. A mainstream historical fact about your profession is that jesters were sometimes given the honorific title of King's Fool, which, while not a real title of nobility, did give them some measure of legal protection and a guaranteed place in the royal household. This helped, but it was far from an ironclad guarantee. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, particularly in the later Middle Ages, became known for their ability to play chess, and would often engage the king in games that were as much about wit and verbal sparring as they were about the board. This, of course, was just another way to be on another performance. Historians still argue whether this constant need to perform led to a kind of professional melancholy among jesters, a quiet sadness beneath the bells and the laughter. You certainly feel it sometimes. The pressure is relentless, the expectation is exhausting, and tonight, with the king looking particularly sullen, you know you'll have to work extra hard to earn your keep and, more importantly, to keep your place. You feel a slight tremble in your hands, but you force a smile, your face a mask of good cheer. The show, as they say, must go on. You step forward, the bells on your hat tinkling like a nervous chorus. At the king's eyes, heavy with boredom, flick in your direction. This is it. This is where your true genius, and your greatest danger, lies. Your jokes aren't just punchlines, they are political tools, sharp and double-edged. You can't just talk about the weather or the day's hunt. That's for the bards and the minstrels. Your job is to say the things no one else dares to. You can criticize the king's policy, mock a powerful duke's foolish pride, or even hint at a secret affair without anyone being able to truly hold you accountable. It's a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. The king might laugh, but the duke you just roasted is probably plotting your demise in his head, his face a mask of forced amusement. You decide to start with a jab at the recent tax increase. It's a risk, but it's what the common people are whispering about, and the king enjoys feeling like he's in on the joke, that he's a man of the people, even if he's the one taking all their coin. "My lord," you begin, your voice a theatrical whisper that carries through the great hall. "I was speaking with a farmer today, and he was so grateful for the new tax. He said his pockets were feeling far too heavy, and now he can finally walk without a limp." A few snickers ripple through the room. The king's lips twitch upward, a good sign. He knows it's a jab, but he also knows it's true, and in a twisted way. Your humor serves as a kind of feedback loop, a strange, roundabout way for the ruler to gauge the mood of his subjects. The danger, of course, is saying something that hits too close to home. You know that Duke Robert and the Queen have been a little too chummy lately, a fact that could get you killed in an instant. You're not going to mention that directly, of course, but you might make a joke about the Duke's affinity for a certain type of French perfume, a perfume known to be worn by the Queen. The crowd would get it. The king would get it, and everyone would pretend they didn't. That's the unspoken agreement. You get to say the unsayable, and everyone gets to pretend they didn't hear it. It's a social contract built on plausible deniability. You are, in essence, a professional gossip in a silly hat. A mainstream historical fact is that many jesters were seen as licensed truth-tellers, and were often the only people who could deliver bad news or controversial opinions to a monarch without risking immediate punishment. This role made them valuable, but also incredibly vulnerable. A quirky tidbit is that jesters sometimes used puppets or props to deliver their most dangerous jokes, a thin veil of separation that gave them just a little more protection. Historians still argue whether this use of humour as a political tool was a deliberate strategy by the king to gather unfiltered information, or simply a byproduct of the jester's unique position at court. As you stand there, the laughter fading, you know it's both. The king wants the truth, but only if it's wrapped in a joke so he can ignore it later. And you are the one who has to spin that lethal yarn. Your repertoire extends far beyond the spoken word. The bells on your cap jingle again as you bow, signalling the end of the last bit and the beginning of the next. You don't just tell jokes, you are a living, breathing variety show, a one-man circus. The king claps once, a dismissive gesture that means, entertain me, but make it quick. Your next act is physical. You drop to the ground and begin to contort your body into strange and difficult shapes, a series of acrobatic maneuvers that would impress a modern gymnast. You've spent years training, stretching, and tumbling, often in secret, to hone these skills. The nobles gawk, some in genuine awe, others in thinly veiled contempt. They don't have to do this. They don't have to risk a broken bone for a moment of their ruler's amusement. They just sit there and eat their pigeons. This is a side of the jester's life that most people forget. You aren't just a comedian, you are a master of many disciplines. You can juggle 3 knives and an apple while standing on your head. You can play a lute and sing a bawdy song with a perfect falsetto. You can tell a sprawling, epic tale that holds the entire court spellbound. You are a repository of skills, a one-man band in a world where everyone else has a single, defined role. This versatility is what makes you so valuable and what makes your life so exhausting. You are the court's multi-tool, and you must be ready for any task, from entertaining visiting dignitaries to comforting a sick child of the king. One mainstream historical fact is that many jesters were also skilled musicians and singers, often composing their own satirical songs to perform. It was a core part of their act. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters were known for their ability to perform rudimentary magic tricks, simple sleight-of-hand illusions that would amaze a medieval audience. Think of a very early version of a stage magician. The idea of magic was still very much tied to superstition, so this was a dangerous but often effective way to capture attention. Historians still argue whether these varied skills were a requirement of the job or simply a natural outcome of a person who had to be good at everything to survive. You think it's the latter. You're a walking, talking, tumbling answer to the question, what if a human had to be a Swiss Army knife? You are a jack of all trades, and the master of your own survival, as you finish your last tumble and pop back up onto your feet with a flourish. You see the king smile. It's a genuine smile this time. You've done your job, for now, and your aching back, which feels like a million tiny daggers, is just part of the price of admission. Now, let's talk about the outfit, your motley. The ridiculous patchwork of brightly coloured fabrics isn't just a costume, it's a uniform, a cage, and a social signifier all at once. You hate it. The seams are scratchy. The wool is too hot in the summer and not warm enough in the winter. And the bells sewn onto every point of your cap and cuffs are a constant, irritating jangle. You can't sneak up on anyone. You can't have a moment of quiet reflection. And you certainly can't disappear into a crowd. You are a walking, talking public display. This is the ultimate fashion faux pas. A deliberate and constant reminder of your strange, liminal social status. You wear the bright, clashy colours of a madman and an outcast. You wear the symbols of your profession, the bladder stick, the marotte, a kind of sceptre with a fool's head on it, and beyond, of course, the cap and bells. Your costume marks you as different, as not belonging to any of the other social classes. A noble wears velvet and silk to show his wealth, a knight wears his armour to show his strength, a peasant wears rough-spun linen to show his place in the dirt. You wear this sartorial nightmare, to show you are neither. You are a professional oddity. And while the nobles might privately think your outfit is a hoot, they wouldn't be caught dead in anything so undignified. But your costume serves a purpose beyond just looking silly. It's a tool. The bright colours catch the eye. The jingling bells draw attention. And the overall ridiculousness of it all helps to disarm people. It's hard to stay angry or tense when there's a grown man in front of you dressed like a clown. This is your psychological armour. It's the visual cue that says, What I am about to say might be offensive, but don't take it seriously, because I am just a fool. One mainstream historical fact is that the Jester's motley, with its multicolored patches, was a deliberate echo of a patchwork quilt or a collection of mismatched fabrics, symbolizing the Jester's composite and irregular role in society. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the Jester's bladder stick, a stick with an inflated animal bladder at the end, wasn't just for slapstick comedy, it was also used to whack people playfully, a gesture that would be an unforgivable insult from anyone else. But from you, it's just a joke. Historians still argue whether the Jester's costume was a form of protection or a form of humiliation. You think it's a bit of both. It protects you from the serious consequences of your words, but it also constantly reminds you that you are, and always will be, a societal outcast, an object of amusement, and never a person of true standing. Every time you move, 100 tiny bells announce your presence, and you are never, ever, truly alone with your thoughts. The feast ends, the nobles disperse, and you are left alone in the cavernous hall. The servants come in with buckets of water and brooms, their tired eyes barely registering your presence. And this is the other side of your life, the one no one sees. When the laughter stops, the loneliness begins. You retreat to your small, cramped quarters, a room often located near the stables or the kitchens, far from the lavish sleeping chambers of the nobility. This is your personal life, or what's left of it. It's a quiet existence, punctuated by the rhythmic chugging of the castle mill and the distant shouts of the guards. Your social life is, to put it mildly, complicated. You can't truly befriend the nobles. You're their entertainment, not their equal. A friendship with you is a form of slumming, a brief moment of amusement before they return to their real business of power and intrigue. And you can't truly belong with the servants either. While they may see you as one of them in terms of social standing, your access to the king, your strange freedom of speech, sets you apart. You are a ghost, a drifter, belonging to neither world. You exist in the in-between, a professional nomad in a stationary building. This loneliness is a form of professional hazard. You are constantly surrounded by people, yet you are fundamentally isolated. You are the court's confidant, a keeper of secrets you would never dare repeat, but you have no one to confide in yourself. The king might listen to your jokes, but he wouldn't listen to your troubles. The stable master might share a drink with you, but he wouldn't share his deepest fears. You are a mirror for everyone else, reflecting their flaws and their humor, but you have no one to hold a mirror up to you. A mainstream historical fact about Jester's private lives is that they were often given their own servant, a kind of apprentice or aide, but this person was more of a helper than a friend. A quirky tidbit is that Jesters often kept pets, dogs or monkeys as companions, perhaps as a way to have a non-judgmental presence in their isolated lives. You can almost see why. A dog doesn't care if your last joke bombed, he just wants a scratch behind the ears. Historians still argue whether the Jester's loneliness was a deliberate part of their role, a way to ensure they couldn't form alliances or betray their patrons, or just an unfortunate side effect of their bizarre place in society. As you lie down on your scratchy wool blanket, listening to the creaking timbers of the castle, you suspect it's both. The silence is deafening, a stark contrast to the noisy, crowded, and ultimately empty public life you lead. The king is hosting a grand feast tonight, and the court is a stage teeming with rivals, all vying for the same prize, the ruler's attention. You're not just competing against yourself, you're competing against the minstrels with their soothing lutes, the storytellers with their epic tales of heroics, and even the court dwarfs who perform their own bizarre little antics. The king has a limited amount of amusement, and you are just one of many performers trying to get a slice of it. This rivalry is a cutthroat, backstabbing game, played with subtle glances and whispered insults. You feel a sharp jab in your side and turn to see Barnaby, the court's resident bard. He has a smug look on his face. "A bit slow tonight, are we? My little fool," he whispers, his voice dripping with condescension. You know what he's doing. He wants to throw you off your game, to make you doubt yourself. He's been on a good run lately, with a few of his songs getting the king to hum along. This is his way of telling you that your reign as the king's favourite toy might be coming to an end. It's a constant battle for relevance, a war of attrition fought with wit instead of swords. The most dangerous part is that these rivals aren't just trying to outshine you, they are trying to make you fail. A minstrel might strategically play a beautiful, mournful tune right before your big comedic number, killing the mood and making your jokes fall flat. A storyteller might share a tale that perfectly mirrors one of your planned bits, stealing your thunder and making you look unoriginal. It's an exhausting and often demoralizing game. It's a bit like being a professional athlete who, in addition to playing against the other team, also has to worry about his teammates sabotaging his equipment. A mainstream historical fact is that court jesters often had to share their duties with a variety of other entertainers, including musicians, poets, and acrobats, creating a competitive environment. A quirky tidbit is that jesters would sometimes get into physical brawls with other entertainers, with their bladder sticks and marottes serving as impromptu weapons. The castle wasn't all prim and proper feasts. Sometimes it was a brawl over who got to perform first. Historians still argue whether the presence of so many different entertainers was a sign of a vibrant, healthy court culture or a calculated move by the ruler to ensure no single entertainer became too powerful or influential. You feel that it's probably a bit of both. The king wants to be amused, but he also wants to make sure that no single person is indispensable. So you stand there, your bells jangling, ready for your turn, knowing that a misstep could mean Barnaby gets your room, your rations, and maybe even your job. Your moment arrives. The king waves his hand, a silent command for you to begin. You take a step forward, your mind whirring, trying to calculate the right blend of wit, sarcasm, and harmless folly. You decide on a bit about the queen's new pet falcon, a joke about its questionable hunting skills and its even more questionable taste in hats. The nobles titter, the king smiles, and you feel the familiar swell of relief. You're doing it, you're succeeding. But then, you see the queen's eyes narrow. The joke wasn't about the falcon's hat, it was a subtle jab at her own recent sartorial choices. A silk headdress she'd been bragging about for weeks. You knew it was a risk, but you didn't think she would catch the nuance. She did. The laughter in the hall dies. The air grows cold. The king's smile is gone, replaced by a look of detached curiosity. You can feel the weight of every eye in the room on you. 1,000 tiny daggers of judgment. The joke has fallen flat. But worse than that, it has offended. The queen stands, her face a mask of furious dignity. "My lord," she says, her voice as sharp and cold as a winter's blade. "I believe the fool has forgotten his place." And just like that, the laughter has stopped. Your shield is gone. The consequences are immediate and brutal. A guard steps forward, his hand on the hilt of his sword. You're not being executed, not yet, anyway, but you're being dragged away, out of the hall, out of the warmth and the light and the safety of the court. You can hear the king's voice, distant and muffled, saying something to the effect of, "Let him spend a night in the cells. It will remind him that a joke is only as good as the audience who hears it." You feel a sense of profound and terrible resignation. This is what it's all been leading to. This is the moment when the laughter stops, and the brutal reality of your position sets in. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters who overstepped their boundaries were often severely punished, sometimes even executed for sedition or treason. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters were made to eat their own costumes as a form of public humiliation before being banished. Historians still argue whether the jester's freedom of speech was a real privilege or simply a fleeting indulgence granted by a bored monarch. You can feel the answer in the cold stone of the castle dungeon walls as the guard shoves you inside. It was never a real privilege, it was just an illusion. And the moment you forgot that, you lost everything. You're alone now, in the dark, with nothing but the silence and the cold and the memory of a joke that didn't land. You're in the darkness of the dungeon. But your mind travels far beyond the cold. Stone walls, you're thinking about where all this started, this strange, dangerous lineage of laughter. You trace the jester's bloodline back to ancient civilizations, to the court entertainers of Egypt and the Roman Empire. These were the very first professional clowns, the earliest fools. The concept of a person whose job was to make the powerful laugh isn't a medieval invention. It's a practice that's as old as power itself. The Roman Empire had their scura, or buffoons, who would crack jokes at dinner parties. And the ancient Egyptians had dwarfs who were often kept as companions for their ability to amuse the royal court. These early examples, you realize, were not so different from you. They also occupied that strange middle ground. Not quite servant, not quite friend, not quite family, but a valuable and necessary part of the social order. They had their own unique struggles, their own dangers. You can imagine a scura telling a joke that didn't land, or a Roman emperor getting tired of a buffoon's antics. There's a universality to your plight, a shared experience across thousands of years and vast continents. This isn't just a medieval thing, this is a human thing. The need to laugh, and the need for someone to take the risk to make you laugh, is a constant. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters and their predecessors were often recruited from marginalized groups, including people with physical deformities or intellectual disabilities, who were seen as different and therefore inherently amusing. This is a grim but important part of your history. A quirky tidbit is that in some ancient Roman households, the jester's role was filled by slaves who were specifically trained to be witty and entertaining. Imagine being a slave and having to be funny on command. It gives your own plight a new layer of despair. Historians still argue whether these ancient fools were considered more of a pet or a human being, a thing to be owned or a person with a soul. As you sit there, shivering, you realize that the same question is being asked about you. The laughter they enjoyed was real, but the human being behind it was always, in some fundamental way, invisible. The bells on your hat are silent, but in your head, the echoes of 1,000 years of professional fools jingle on. Your time in the dungeon is a good moment for reflection. You aren't just a comedian. You realize you're a utility. Your duties extend far beyond making people laugh. You've often been tasked with the uncomfortable job of delivering bad news to the king. A messenger might be killed for bringing word of a lost battle, but you're the one who can wrap the bitter truth in a funny little package. "My lord," you might say, with a dramatic sigh, "I bring terrible news from the south. The enemy, it seems, has decided that our fortifications were a bit too pretty and has taken it upon themselves to redecorate with fire." The king would laugh, a dark and hollow sound, but he would also understand the message, and you would still have your head. You are a confidant, too. The king and queen, and even the nobles, would often seek you out for advice. Why? Because you're the one person who isn't a threat. You hold no land, no title, no power, and therefore you can be trusted with secrets. They'll tell you about their rivalries, their loves, their fears, and their foolish plans, knowing that you can't use that information against them. It's a strange kind of intimacy, a one-sided confession booth. You listen, you nod, you offer a witty remark or a sardonic observation, and then you carry their burdens with you. A living repository of courtly gossip and intrigue. This dual role, comedian and confidant, makes you indispensable, but also puts you in even greater peril. You are a bridge between the public and private worlds of the court, and if that bridge ever collapses, you will be the first to fall into the chasm. You have to be a master of discretion, a silent and unassuming keeper of other people's most dangerous secrets. Your job is not to wield power, but to simply be the vessel through which it can flow without incident. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters were often the only people in court with the psychological freedom to act as a buffer between the monarch and his subjects, delivering difficult news or voicing public discontent without risking their lives. A quirky tidbit is that jesters were sometimes used as an early form of therapy, with nobles confiding their anxieties and fears to them, a kind of pre-modern psychoanalysis. Historians still argue whether this unique role made the jester more or less human in the eyes of the court. You think it just made you more of a tool, a strange and useful object to be used when no one else would do. You are not a person, not really. You're a solution to a problem. You're out of the dungeon now, but you're on probation. The king is still cross with you, and your future is more uncertain than ever. This is the brutal reality of the patronage system. Your entire existence, from your next meal to the very roof over your head, is a gift from a single, fickle person. Your job isn't protected by a contract or a guild. It's protected by the king's mood. And his moods are as changeable as the weather. One day, you are his most trusted confidant and friend. The next, you are a nuisance to be thrown into the oubliette. You see it in every aspect of your life. The clothes you wear, not yours. They are a gift from the king, and he can take them away. The food you eat, not earned. It is a portion of the royal larder, granted at the king's pleasure, the very space you occupy in the castle, a temporary loan. You are a dependent, a man who has traded his freedom for a strange kind of security. A serf is bound to the land, but at least he knows what his obligations are and what he's going to get in return. You are bound to a personality, to a person who can wake up one day and decide he's tired of clowns. This dependence breeds a certain kind of anxiety, a constant, low-grade hum of fear that never truly goes away. You're always on a tightrope, always wondering if your last joke was your last joke, if your last meal was your last meal. This is a very different kind of anxiety from, say, a knight's fear of a battle. A knight knows his fear comes from an external, physical source. Your fear comes from an internal, psychological one. It's the fear of being forgotten, of being discarded, of no longer being amusing enough to matter. It's a professional existential crisis, with bells on. A mainstream historical fact is that the jester's role was entirely informal and based on personal relationships, not legal standing, which made their position incredibly unstable. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, knowing the precarity of their situation, would often secretly beg for food and coins from the other nobles and servants, creating a kind of personal savings account for the inevitable day they would be cast out. Historians still argue whether this patronage system made jesters more creative and daring, or whether it simply ground them down into compliant puppets. You feel the truth is a bit of both. You are forced to be inventive to survive, but you also feel your soul being slowly eroded by the constant pressure to please. You just want a steady paycheck and a good night's sleep. But alas, that's not in the job description. The king is on the move, and you, as a part of his household, are on the move with him. This means you are constantly travelling, enduring the harsh realities of life on the road in the medieval world. You're not in a cushy carriage, you're probably on a horse, or maybe a mule, trudging along muddy, unpaved roads. The weather is unpredictable, the nights are cold, and the inns you stay at are often crawling with fleas and rodents. This nomadic existence is a far cry from the life of a courtier who might stay in one luxurious place for months on end. You are a human caravan, and the road is your second home. You're also responsible for your own safety. The roads are filled with bandits, and even though you are a jester, not a noble, you're still a valuable target. A kidnapper might not be able to hold you for a huge ransom, but they can still demand a decent chunk of coin from the king to get you back. You have to be constantly vigilant, your head on a swivel. You're a target not just because of your connection to the king, but because your odd appearance, the motley and the bells, makes you stand out like a sore thumb. A knight can blend in with other knights. A merchant can blend in with other merchants. You are always, always a jester. And you are always, always a target. This life of constant travel is physically and mentally exhausting. There are no smooth rides, no easy nights. Every bone in your body aches, every muscle is sore, and you still have to be ready to perform the moment you arrive at a new castle or a new encampment. The king is probably tired and grumpy from the journey, and it's your job to cheer him up. You're not just a travelling entertainer, you're a professional morale booster, a human antidepressant with bells on. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval courts were not stationary and would often travel from castle to castle, both for political reasons and to consume the resources of their various landholdings. Jesters, as part of the royal household, were expected to travel with them. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters became skilled in foraging for food and finding safe shelter on the road, as they were often considered an afterthought in the logistical planning of a royal procession. Historians still argue whether this constant movement made jesters more worldly and well-informed, or simply more worn out and miserable. As you trudge through the mud, the cold seeping into your boots, you're leaning toward the latter. You just want a hot bath and a soft bed, but the next castle is still a day's ride away. You're exhausted from the journey, and the bells on your cap feel less like a joyful chorus and more like a ball and chain. As you arrive at the new castle, you are once again confronted with your strange and peculiar place in the great chain of being. This was the medieval understanding of the universe, a rigid, hierarchical structure that placed God at the top, followed by angels, monarchs, nobles, knights, and finally, the peasants and serfs at the very bottom. Every person had a defined place, a fixed role, and a clear set of duties and obligations. And then there's you. You're an anomaly, a glitch in the system. You have access to the highest echelons of power, yet you have no formal rank. You can mock a duke, but you can't own a square foot of land. You are both a part of the king's household and an outsider looking in. The nobles and the clergy, the knights and the merchants, they all know their place. They know who is above them, who is below them, and who they can trust. But you're in a category of one. You exist outside the strict social hierarchy. A professional wildcard. This peculiar place in the social order is both your greatest asset and your greatest liability. It gives you a kind of freedom that no one else has. You can come and go as you please. You can say what you want, within reason. And you are not bound by the same social obligations as everyone else. But it also means that you have no one to rely on, no one to truly protect you. A nobleman might have a family, a title, and a network of alliances to fall back on. You have nothing but your wit and your patron's fleeting good humour. It's a bit like being a freelancer in a world of full-time employees, except your freelancer status means you can be fired on a whim and left to fend for yourself. A mainstream historical fact is that the jester's role was often seen as a social safety valve, allowing for criticism of the ruling class in a way that was non-threatening and even entertaining. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some theologians of the time considered the jester to be a kind of living paradox, a fool in God's eyes but a wise man in the eyes of the court. Historians still argue whether the jester's unique position was a deliberate subversion of the great chain of being or just a happy accident of medieval society. You think it was both, a calculated risk by the king to have someone around who could say the unsayable, a living paradox of power and powerlessness. The sun is rising, its light slanting through the high windows of the great hall. It's a new day, and that means your job begins again. A day in the life of a court jester is a grueling, non-stop performance, a relentless cycle of observation and amusement. You're up before most of the nobles, often with the cooks and the stable hands. You grab a quick, rough breakfast, some bread and watered-down ale, and you start your day's work. This isn't about jokes yet, it's about intelligence gathering. You wander the halls, listening to the morning gossip of the servants, the whispers of the guards changing shifts. This is how you get your material, how you stay ahead of the curve. You're a walking, talking intelligence agency. By mid-morning, you're in the king's private chambers, a kind of pre-feast warm-up act. You might tell a few stories, sing a funny song, or just be a presence, a kind of living, breathing, silly-hatted background noise. The king is busy with his scribes and his advisors, but he always has an ear open for you. This is your chance to slip in a bit of news, to deliver a piece of intelligence you've gathered, or to simply gauge his mood for the evening's main event. It's a delicate dance, a performance with an audience of one, and you have to be at the top of your game, even at 7 in the morning. The afternoon is a mix of boredom and practice. You might spend hours alone in your room, working on a new juggling routine, or practicing a difficult song on your lute. You have to stay sharp, stay current. You can't just recycle the same old jokes. You have to have a steady stream of new material. The king will get bored. And a bored king is a dangerous king. You're constantly creating, constantly innovating, constantly trying to find new ways to make people laugh. It's a creative job, but it's also a job with a crushing deadline. The feast is tonight, and you have to be ready. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters often had no set working hours and were expected to be available for the king at all times, day or night. A quirky tidbit is that jesters were often the ones who would wake the king in the morning, a strange and intimate part of their duties. Imagine waking up to a man in a silly hat with bells on. It's a bit of a shock to the system. Historians still argue whether this constant availability was an honor or just another form of servitude. You think it's both. You are a privileged companion, but you are also a property, an object of amusement to be used whenever the whim strikes. And as you put on your motley for the day's performance, you feel the weight of a long and difficult day stretching out before you. Your job requires a lot of tumbling, juggling, and physical comedy, which means you are constantly at risk of injury. A sprained ankle here, a dislocated shoulder there, and in the medieval world, where medicine is rudimentary at best, these injuries aren't a minor inconvenience, they're a major threat. A simple infection from a scraped knee could be a death sentence. There are no x-rays, no antibiotics, no physical therapists. There are just leeches, strange poultices made of herbs and spiderwebs, and a lot of prayer. You've seen the court physician at work. He's a well-meaning man, but his ideas about health are, to put it mildly, unorthodox. His favourite cure for a headache is a hole drilled into the patient's skull to let out the bad humours. You try to avoid him at all costs. This lack of decent healthcare adds another layer of anxiety to your life. A simple fall could end your career, or worse, you have to be incredibly careful, but you also have to be incredibly daring. The king wants to see you risk life and limb for his amusement. He wants you to do a handstand on the back of a wobbly chair or to juggle fire, and you, knowing the consequences of a bad performance, push yourself to do it, even though every bone in your body screams in protest. The irony is, you're a professional who has to risk injury for a king who can afford the best doctors and healers in the land. The king's life is about comfort and luxury. Your life is about constant physical danger. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval medicine was based on the theory of the four humours, which posited that illness was caused by an imbalance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatments often involved trying to restore this balance, often through bleeding or purging. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters, with their strange and often grotesque appearance, were sometimes believed to have a natural immunity to certain diseases, or to have a special connection to magic that protected them. Historians still argue whether the jesters' frequent exposure to a variety of people on the road and in court made them more susceptible to illness or more resistant to it. You suspect it made you more of a walking petri dish. And you try not to think about the last time you saw a doctor. You're not just a jester, you're also a man. And that means you have the same fundamental human needs as everyone else, including the desire for a family. But for a man in your profession, marriage and family life are incredibly difficult. The nobles have arranged marriages, carefully planned alliances that secure land and power. The serfs can marry for love, but their lives are tied to the land. You, on the other hand, are a nomad, a wanderer. How can you have a wife and children when you're on the road for months at a time, living in one cold castle after another? Your social standing is also a problem. No respectable noble family would marry their daughter to a professional fool, no matter how clever or witty you are, and a peasant woman might be tempted by your proximity to the king and the promise of a more comfortable life. But she would also have to endure a life of constant travel and social isolation. You are not a good prospect for a husband, you're a liability. Your entire life is a gamble. And no one in their right mind would want to hitch their wagon to your strange and unpredictable star. The loneliness of your personal life is a heavy burden, and it's a topic you've never been able to joke about. It's a fundamental part of your identity, a consequence of your career choice. While the king has his queen and his children, and the stable master has his wife and his brood, you have a room near the stables and the company of your own thoughts. You are a man without a home, a professional outcast, and a person who can never truly put down roots. This is the great irony of your life. You are a professional entertainer whose audience is everyone, but you have no one to share your life with. A mainstream historical fact is that many jesters and court entertainers were either single or had very unstable family lives due to their nomadic and precarious existence. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, knowing they could not have a family of their own, would act as a kind of surrogate uncle or older brother to the king's children, a role that gave them a small taste of family life without the responsibilities. Historians still argue whether this lack of a traditional family unit made the jester a more independent and creative performer, or simply a more tragic and lonely figure. As you sit alone in your room, listening to the muffled sounds of a family in the nearby courtyard, you're pretty sure it's the latter. Your time in the dungeon has given you a lot of time to think, and you realize something a little terrifying. You are a walking, talking repository of secrets. As the court jester, you are privy to things that no one else is. You hear the king whisper his anxieties to the queen. You see the furtive glances between the Duke of Cornwall and the Countess of Wessex, and you know exactly who forged the letter that discredited the Bishop of Bristol. You are a living history book, a walking file cabinet of courtly intrigue, and every single one of those secrets could get you killed. This is the most dangerous part of your job. You are a professional gossip, but your gossip is not for public consumption. Your jokes are a way of hinting at these secrets, of letting the court know that you are in on their little games. But never, ever, can you be so explicit as to reveal the truth. Your jokes are the shadow of the truth, not the truth itself. The moment you cross that line, the moment you tell a secret that isn't wrapped in a clever joke or a bit of harmless buffoonery, is the moment you become a liability that can, and will, be eliminated. The nobles see you as an amusing diversion, but they also know that you are a silent witness to their lives, their scandals, and their political machinations. They trust you with their secrets because they believe you're too simple to understand them, or too much of a coward to reveal them. They are wrong on both counts. You are a master of feigned ignorance, a professional idiot. You act like you don't understand the gravity of the things you've seen, and that performance is your greatest protection. You are a living time bomb, and you have to be careful not to let anyone get close enough to light the fuse. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters were often the eyes and ears of the court, a valuable source of intelligence for the monarch. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters were known to have their own private shorthand or code, a kind of secret language they used to write down their observations and jokes. A form of self-preservation. Historians still argue whether this access to dangerous secrets gave the jester more power or simply put them in greater peril. You feel the truth is it did both, in equal measure. You have a kind of power, but it's the power of a man standing on a cliff's edge, holding a rock over the heads of the people below. It's a power you can never, ever use. You're still in your room, and your mind drifts to your future, or, more accurately, your legacy. You won't have a family to carry on your name. You won't have a plot of land to bequeath, and you won't have a noble title to pass down. But in a way, you will live on. You see yourself in the fools of literature, in the wise-cracking servants of plays and the cunning clowns of stories. You are the archetype of the fool, and your brand of humour has an enduring power. You are in the words of poets and playwrights. You think of Shakespeare, a writer who will be born hundreds of years after you're gone. His plays, you feel, will be full of people like you, fools who are the only ones wise enough to see the truth, who can speak with impunity when everyone else is silent. His characters, like Touchstone in As You Like It or the fool in King Lear, are not just there for laughs. They are commentators, truth-tellers, and the moral compass of the plays. This, you realize, is your legacy. Your life may be precarious and painful, but your memory, the very idea of you, will live on in art and culture. The jester's legacy isn't one of power or wealth, but one of truth and wit. You are a symbol, an idea, a concept that will outlive the castles and the kings you serve. A mainstream historical fact is that the jester archetype was heavily used in plays and literature, particularly in the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, as a way to subvert social norms and comment on society without direct retribution. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the very word jester comes from the old French word geste, which means tale or romance, suggesting that jesters were originally storytellers. Historians still argue whether the literary fool was an accurate representation of the real-life jester or a romanticized version of a very grim reality. You know, the truth is a bit of both. Your reality is far from romantic, but the idea of you, the symbol of you, is something that will last forever. The feast is a minefield of social etiquette and political intrigue, and you, the jester, must navigate it with a mix of cunning and wit. It's not just about telling jokes, it's about timing them perfectly. You have to know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to be the life of the party and when to fade into the background. You're watching the king, reading his every gesture, every nuance. A hand to his chin means he's bored, a tapping finger means he's getting impatient. You are a human mood ring, and your performance is dictated by the emotional climate of the room. The physical perils of a court feast are also very real. The hall is crowded, and the floor is a greasy mess of spilled wine and food scraps. The risk of slipping and falling is ever present, and a clumsy fall could mean a broken bone. You also have to be careful what you eat and drink. You don't have a personal food taster like the king does, so you have to be vigilant for poison. It's not a common occurrence, but it's not unheard of for a disgruntled noble to try and poison an enemy, and for you, the lowest on the social ladder, to be the collateral damage. So you eat sparingly, and you drink even less, always with a careful eye. A mainstream historical fact about medieval feasts is that they were not just social gatherings but also important political events where alliances were forged and rivalries were played out. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters were often used to announce the next course of the meal with a comical rhyme or a witty jingle, a job that put you in the spotlight but also gave you a chance to gauge the room before you launched into your main act. Historians still argue whether these feasts were a source of great stress or a rare moment of release for the jester. You know it's both. You get to eat and be a part of the action. But you also have to be constantly on guard, constantly performing. The feast is not a party for you, it's another stage, and the food is just a side dish. You're back on the road, travelling with the royal court. The air is cold, and the mood is sombre. The Black Death, a terrible plague you've only heard whispers of, is now a grim reality. It's sweeping through Europe, killing millions, and your court is not immune. You see the king's knights and nobles fall ill, one by one. The plague doesn't care about rank or title. It strikes everyone, from the lowliest stable boy to the most powerful duke, and it's coming for you, too, for you, the jester. The plague is an even greater threat. You are a public entertainer, a man who has to be in the middle of a crowded hall every night. You can't just hole up in your chambers and wait it out. You have to perform. You have to make the king laugh, even as the coughs of the dying echo in the corridors. Your job is to bring levity to a world of death, a surreal and morbid task that feels less like a performance and more like an act of desperation. You are, in a sense, a human talisman against the end of the world. A ridiculous little figure trying to hold back the tide of despair with a few funny jokes. The irony isn't lost on you. The very people you are trying to cheer up are the ones who could be carrying the disease that will kill you. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death, which swept through Europe from 1347 to 1351, killed an estimated 30 to 60% of the population, a staggering number that reshaped medieval society. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, in an attempt to be safe, would wear bizarre masks or costumes during their performances, believing that the costumes would protect them from the disease. Historians still argue whether the jester's humour during this time was a form of mass denial or a profound expression of human resilience. As you trudge along the road, the sounds of distant church bells tolling for the dead, you think it's both. The humour is a shield against the inevitable, a small act of defiance in the face of a world that is falling apart. The world around you is changing, and so is your role. You can feel it in the air. The old ways are fading, and a new era is dawning. This is the beginning of the fall of the jester. The professional court fool, a man in a silly hat who can speak the truth with impunity, is becoming a thing of the past. The king's court is getting more formal, more serious, and less tolerant of your antics. The nobles are more educated, more worldly, and less easily amused by slapstick and bawdy jokes. They are more interested in philosophy and art than in fart jokes. This is a slow, painful decline. You're not being fired, but you're being phased out. The king is more likely to listen to a learned advisor than he is to you. Your jokes are still funny, but they are no longer necessary. They are a relic of a simpler, more brutal time. You are a vestige, a living fossil, a reminder of a world that is quickly disappearing. The court is becoming more sophisticated, and you, the symbol of its boorish past, are no longer a welcome presence. You're like a court minstrel trying to compete with a symphony orchestra. A mainstream historical fact is that the role of the professional court jester began to decline in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, as courts became more formal and more influenced by intellectual and artistic movements. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, sensing the change, tried to reinvent themselves as poets or satirists, but they were often seen as the fool who thinks he's a poet. A bit of a tragic figure. Historians still argue whether the decline of the jester was a sign of a more enlightened society or a loss of an important social safety valve that allowed for open criticism. You feel that it was probably a bit of both. You are being replaced by a new kind of intellectual, a new kind of fool, and your silly hat and bells are no longer a symbol of wit, but of a fading past. The king is now more interested in the intellectual pursuits of the Renaissance. He's more likely to discuss the works of a painter like Leonardo da Vinci or a philosopher like Erasmus of Rotterdam than he is to listen to a joke about a fat priest. The court is evolving, and with it, a new kind of fool is emerging. This new fool isn't a professional buffoon in a silly hat. He's an intellectual, a satirist, a poet, and a playwright. He is, in a way, a more dangerous and subtle version of you. This new kind of fool, what we might now call a court wit or a satirist, doesn't rely on slapstick or juggling. His humour is based on an understanding of human nature, on political commentary, and on the clever use of language. He doesn't need a bladder stick or a motley to get his point across. He uses a sharpened pen and a razor-sharp mind. He can deliver a searing critique of the king's policies in a poem that sounds like a compliment. He is a master of double-speak, a professional ironist. This new fool is a direct threat to your existence. He offers the king the same kind of critical perspective you do, but in a more sophisticated and, in the eyes of the court, a more respectable package. You feel a profound sense of obsolescence. You're a relic. A man who knows 1,000 ways to trip and fall, but who can't write a single sonnet. The world is moving on, and you are being left behind. The king still keeps you around, but it's more out of a sense of nostalgia than out of any real need. You are a pet, a reminder of a bygone era. A mainstream historical fact is that during the Renaissance, many courts replaced their professional jesters with more intellectually inclined wits or poets who performed a similar satirical function. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of these new fools would write entire books of clever and witty sayings, which would be passed around the court and discussed. A kind of early modern version of a viral meme. Historians still argue whether this new intellectual fool was a step forward for the art of comedy or a step back, as it moved humour away from the common man and into the hands of the educated elite. You know it's a step back for you, a sign that your time is coming to an end. Your mind, still a little foggy from the journey, begins to wander beyond the confines of your own world. You think about other cultures, other courts, and the other fools who must exist in them. You wonder about the court entertainers in the Ottoman Empire, or the jesters of the emperors of China. What were their lives like? Were they as precarious as yours? Did they have their own versions of the motley and the bladder stick? You suspect they did. The need for a fool is a universal one. In the Ottoman Empire, you imagine a world of intricate court politics and grand, lavish feasts. Their version of the jester, perhaps a man known for his quick wit and his ability to tell clever stories, would have to navigate a complex web of religious and social rules. His jokes would have to be subtle, his humour a razor-thin line between amusing and offensive. A wrong joke could mean not just banishment, but perhaps a much more permanent and painful end. You feel a strange sense of kinship with this hypothetical Ottoman fool, a shared understanding of a life lived on the edge. You are both men who have to be funny to survive. In the courts of China, you imagine a place of rigid protocol and ancient traditions. The emperor's fool, or Xiaohun, would have to be a master of not just comedy, but also of philosophy and poetry. His jokes would be parables, his humour a way of teaching the emperor a lesson without directly challenging his authority. This is a higher, more intellectual form of your craft, but the risk is, you suspect, is just as great. You are a living example of a universal truth. Wherever there is power, there must also be a fool to gently, or not so gently, mock it. A mainstream historical fact is that many ancient and medieval civilizations, from the east to the west, had a form of court entertainer or jester. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that in the courts of some West African kingdoms, the jester was often a kind of griot or storyteller who would use humour to teach history and moral lessons. Historians still argue whether the universal presence of jesters in different cultures is a sign of a shared human need for humour, or simply a parallel evolution of a necessary social function. You know, it's both. The need for a fool is a fundamental part of the human condition, and your life is a testament to that truth. You have been thinking about the jesters of other courts, but what about the jesters of your own? You've heard whispers, a few old songs, about the rare but documented existence of female jesters in some of the courts of Europe. It's a strange and dangerous existence, even more so than your own. A woman in a man's world, a lady in a man's profession. She would have faced an even more difficult struggle for acceptance, an even more precarious social standing. The traditional role of women in the medieval world was one of subservience and domesticity. They were wives, mothers, and daughters, bound by a strict code of behaviour. A woman who was a jester, who had to be loud, brash, and daring, would have been seen as an anomaly, a social deviant. She wouldn't just be an outcast, she would be a scandal. Her humour would have to be even more carefully calculated, her every move watched with a critical and often judgmental eye. She wouldn't have the same physical freedom you have, the freedom to tumble and to fall. Her body would have been seen as a source of sin and temptation, and she would have had to fight against that perception every single day. She would have been an object of both fascination and disgust. A woman who had dared to step out of her prescribed role and into a man's world. A mainstream historical fact is that while rare, there are documented cases of female jesters, or foolish women in medieval courts, often performing alongside male counterparts. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of these female jesters were also known for their skills as healers or soothsayers, a kind of magical or mystical role that was often associated with women. Historians still argue whether these women were seen as a novelty or a genuine threat to the male-dominated social order. You think it's a bit of both. They were a curiosity, but they were also a living challenge to the way things were, a testament to the fact that even in the most rigid of societies, there is always room for a professional fool. No matter their gender, the castle is still, for the most part, a damp and musty place. You've become accustomed to the constant presence of smells. It's a life of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the reek of the stables and the privy, but you've also become a master of a strange kind of social navigation, a professional navigator of the unhygienic. You've learned how to stand downwind from the stable master, and you've become an expert at holding your breath when you pass a crowded room. This is your reality. The lavish feasts and the king's wealth are just a thin veneer over a world of filth and discomfort. This is a side of medieval life that most people don't think about. The beautiful tapestries and the soaring arches of the great hall can't mask the fact that everyone, from the king to the lowliest peasant, smells a bit off. You, the jester, have a unique perspective on this. You are in everyone's face, and everyone is in yours. You have to be close to the king to whisper a joke, and you have to be close to the nobles to get their attention. You have no personal space, and the consequence of that is you have to live in a world of smells. But there are also moments of reprieve. You've discovered a rare and quirky tidbit. Some of the more progressive nobles and even the king himself would sometimes use herbs and pomanders, little balls of scented herbs, to mask the smells. You've even been given one yourself, a small, fragrant ball of spices that hangs from your belt and is your most cherished possession. It's a small, beautiful thing in a world of ugliness, a momentary oasis of good smells in a desert of bad ones. You clutch it like a good luck charm. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval hygiene was, by modern standards, very poor, with bathing being a rare and often communal activity, and sanitation being almost non-existent in most towns and castles. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of perfumes and scented herbs in the later Middle Ages was a sign of a growing awareness of hygiene or just a way to mask the unpleasant reality. You think it was both, a little bit of both. The pomander in your hand is both a symbol of a new era of cleanliness and a desperate, beautiful attempt to make a stinky world a little less stinky. The king has a new pet, and it's not a dog or a cat. He has a royal menagerie, a bizarre and motley collection of exotic animals. And you, the professional oddity, are now competing for attention with a collection of actual oddities. There's a lion from Africa, a monkey from some distant land, and a strange, feathery bird that talks in a language no one understands. The king is obsessed with these creatures. He spends hours with them, marveling at their strangeness, their wildness, and their sheer exoticism. This is a new and irritating kind of competition. You are a professional entertainer, and you're now up against an orangutan who can throw a banana peel with perfect comedic timing. The nobles are more interested in the lion's roar than in your best one-liner. Your jokes, which you have worked so hard on, are now just a background hum to the chattering of the monkey. You are being out silly-hatted by a bunch of animals. It's a bit demoralizing. To be honest, a mainstream historical fact is that many medieval monarchs kept exotic animals in their castles as a sign of their wealth and power. These menageries were a source of great fascination for the court and the public. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters were sometimes tasked with caring for these animals, a bizarre and often dangerous extension of their duties. You can imagine it now. Hey, fool, go clean the lion's cage. He seems a bit grumpy. Historians still argue whether the presence of these menageries was a sign of a more enlightened and curious age or a way for the monarch to show off their power and control over the natural world. You think it's both. A kind of bizarre and dangerous status symbol. And as you stand there, trying to tell a joke about a goose, you can't help but feel a little jealous of the monkey, who doesn't have to work for his dinner. The king is in a good mood. And that means he's decided to hold a tournament. This isn't just a brutal display of violence, it's a grand spectacle, a mix of sport, pageantry, and political theatre. And you, the jester, are a crucial part of it. Your job is to provide comic relief and to act as a kind of master of ceremonies, announcing the jousts and the other events with a healthy dose of satire and wit. You're a professional hype man in a funny hat. You stand on the sidelines, your voice booming over the crowd. Your jokes a welcome break from the brutal clanging of steel on steel. You mock the knights for their clunky armor, you make fun of their horses prancing, and you do a kind of running, sarcastic commentary on the entire affair. It's a dangerous job, of course. One of those knights, a man whose pride you've just roasted, could lose his match and decide to come find you later. You've got to be careful. Your jokes have to be just insulting enough to be funny, but not so insulting as to get you killed. It's a very fine line, and you walk it every single time. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval tournaments, while brutal, were also highly stylized social events where knights and nobles could show off their prowess and their wealth. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters were often used to announce the rules of the tournament with a comical twist, a kind of in-jousting joke for the crowd. Historians still argue whether the presence of jesters at these events was a sign of a more light-hearted approach to warfare or a way to use humor to make the violence more palatable for the crowd. You think it's a bit of both. You are a man whose job is to make a bloody, violent spectacle a little less bloody and a little more of a show. You've just finished a particularly sharp joke about the Duke of Suffolk's questionable chivalry, and the crowd is roaring with laughter. You look out over the crowd and your eyes fall on a small group of peasants. They're not laughing, they're just watching. Their faces a mix of awe and incomprehension. You are a world away from them. Their life, you realize, is a constant, grinding struggle for survival. Their days are filled with back-breaking labor in the fields. With the constant threat of famine and disease, their lives are short, brutal, and utterly lacking in humor. This is the great contrast of your life. You, the professional fool, have to make people laugh. Even in the middle of a plague, they, the peasants, have a life that is so miserable it seems beyond the reach of comedy. You're a man who lives in a castle, eats the king's food, and travels the world, all on the strength of your wit. They live in huts made of mud and straw, and their only possession is the land they work. You can be a poet, a musician, a storyteller, or a philosopher. They can only be a farmer, a blacksmith, or a baker. Your life is a bizarre and gilded cage. Their life is an open, unyielding field. A mainstream historical fact is that the vast majority of the medieval population were peasants, living a life of subsistence farming and labour, with a life expectancy of around 30 to 40 years. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters, with their unique position, were sometimes seen as a kind of folk hero by the peasants, a man who could get away with mocking the powerful nobles who ruled their lives. Historians still argue whether the jester's humour was a way for the nobles to laugh at the peasants, or a way for the jester to be a voice for the voiceless. You feel it's a bit of both. You are a man who can speak for the peasants, but you are also a man who has to laugh at them to survive. It's a cruel joke, and you are the one who has to tell it. The king is in a foul mood. It's a rainy day, and he's convinced that the thunder and lightning are a sign of God's displeasure. The castle is filled with a sense of unease, a kind of low-grade anxiety that has settled over everyone, and you, the jester, must navigate a world filled with medieval superstitions and charms. You have to be careful what you say, and you have to be even more careful what you do. A wrong joke could be seen as a curse. A funny story could be interpreted as a bad omen. You're a professional entertainer in a world where magic and folklore are as real as the stone walls of the castle. The nobles are wearing little amulets and charms to ward off evil spirits, and the king has a priest with him at all times, sprinkling holy water and saying prayers. You, the professional fool, are expected to play along. You might make a joke about the priest's questionable anointing skills, but you have to do it with a wink and a nod, a kind of tacit agreement that you're just joking, but also that you understand the gravity of the situation. You're a professional skeptic in a world of believers, and you have to be careful not to poke the bear too hard. A wrong move could get you labelled as a heretic or, even worse, a witch. A mainstream historical fact is that the medieval world was deeply superstitious, with people believing in everything from ghosts and goblins to omens and curses. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters were thought to have a special power to ward off evil spirits with their laughter, a kind of magical protection that was a part of their performance. Historians still argue whether the jester's role in these superstitions was a form of professional mockery or a genuine act of folk magic. You feel it's a bit of both. You are a man who can laugh at a ghost and then turn around and offer a prayer for a safe journey. You're a man who lives in two worlds at once, the world of logic and the world of faith, and you have to be careful not to let them collide. Your life is a constant performance, but you're not doing it for the fame or the glory, you're doing it for a living, and your living is a complicated and often disappointing thing. This is the reality of the jester's wages. You don't get a regular paycheck like a knight or a scribe. Your income is a strange and unpredictable mix of coin, clothing, and food. You might get a small sack of silver coins after a good performance, but you might also get a pair of old boots, a cast-off cloak from the king, or just a few scraps from the royal table. The system is designed to keep you dependent and to keep you in your place. You are never rich, and you are never truly secure. The king can give you a gift one day and take it away the next. You have no real property, no savings, no way of building wealth. You are, in a sense, a professional pauper, a man who lives in the lap of luxury but has no claim to any of it. This is a very different kind of poverty from a serf's. A serf is poor, but he is a part of the system, a part of the land. You are poor by design, a man who is meant to be a transient, a temporary fixture in a world of permanence. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters' wages were highly irregular and often non-monetary, consisting of food, lodging, and clothing, a system that kept them in a state of perpetual dependence on their patron. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters were paid in kind, with goods like wine or even a small flock of sheep, a kind of weird and unpredictable form of bartering. Historians still argue whether this lack of regular pay made the jester more or less a part of the social hierarchy. You feel it made you a part of it, but at the very, very bottom, a kind of professional beggar in a world of princes and kings. Your job is to make people laugh, but you are not immune to sadness. You are, in fact, an expert on it. This is the truth of the psychology of the joker. You have to be on all the time, a relentless performance of joy and light. But behind the mask, behind the painted smile and the silly hat, there is a person who is tired, lonely, and often melancholy. You are a man who has to bury his own emotions in order to be a mirror for everyone else's. You are a professional empath, a man who has to read the room and feel its emotional temperature. A king's bad mood is your bad mood. A noble's secret sorrow is your secret sorrow. You absorb all of this, and then you have to transform it, to transmute all of that pain and sadness into a moment of levity. It's a very draining process. You are, in a sense, a human emotional sponge, and there is no one there to wring you out. You just have to hold it all in, to pretend that the world is a funny place, even when it's not. A mainstream historical fact is that many jesters were known for their profound wit and their deep understanding of human nature, a skill that was often born out of their unique psychological position. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, in their later years, would suffer from a kind of professional melancholy, a deep and unshakable sadness that was a direct result of their relentless need to be happy. Historians still argue whether the jester's job was a form of therapy for the court or a form of self-destruction for the jester himself. You think it was both, a kind of necessary and terrible exchange. You give them your happiness, and they give you their sorrow. And you are the one who has to carry the burden. You're thinking about the king's children, the young prince and princess who run wild in the castle's halls. Their life is one of privilege and expectation, a life that is laid out for them from the moment of their birth. And you, the jester, have a unique perspective on their childhood in the Middle Ages. While their lives are filled with tutors and etiquette lessons, yours was probably filled with hardship and a strange kind of freedom. A noble child learns how to ride a horse, how to wield a sword, how to manage an estate. You, on the other hand, learned how to fall without breaking a bone, how to read a room, and how to tell a joke that would land. You didn't have a tutor, you had the world. You didn't learn from books, you learned from people. Your childhood was probably a mix of poverty and a strange, wild kind of freedom. You were a boy on the road, a young man who had to learn how to survive by his wits alone. This is a great contrast to the king's children, who are being groomed for power from a young age. Their lives are about duty and obligation. Your life is about survival and improvisation. You are the professional rebel, the man who lives outside the rules, and you have to be. Your lack of a proper childhood, a normal one, is what made you the man you are today. A mainstream historical fact is that noble children had very specific and rigid educational regimens designed to prepare them for their future roles as rulers or commanders. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters would often teach the royal children simple magic tricks or juggling, a kind of uncurriculum that the children would not get from their formal tutors. Historians still argue whether this unique upbringing made jesters more creative or just more isolated. You think it made you both. A kind of solitary genius born out of a life of professional solitude. The king has decided to go to war, and that means you are going with him. This is a side of the jester's life that no one talks about. You are a part of the royal household, and that means you are a part of the king's military campaigns. You are a professional entertainer in the middle of a war zone. This is the jester's role in warfare. Your job is not to fight. You are not a knight. You are a man in a silly hat with bells on. Your job is to boost morale, to keep the soldiers' spirits up in the face of death and despair. You are the professional optimist, a man who has to make people laugh. Even when they are surrounded by the grim reality of battle, you tell jokes around the campfire. You sing bawdy songs, and you do little skits that mock the enemy, a kind of pre-modern psychological warfare. You are a living reminder that there is a world beyond this one, a world of laughter and of joy, a world that is worth fighting for. But it's a terrifying job. You are a non-combatant in the middle of a battlefield. You are a man with no armor, no sword, no way to defend yourself. You are at the mercy of the enemy and of the chaos of the battlefield, a stray arrow, a misplaced sword, and your career is over. You are a symbol of hope, but you are also a symbol of vulnerability, and you have to be careful not to let anyone see that. You have to be brave, even when you are scared, even when you are surrounded by the sights and sounds of war. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters often accompanied their patrons on military campaigns, acting as a kind of psychological support for the troops. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters were sometimes used to deliver taunts or insults to the enemy, a kind of verbal volley before the physical one began. Historians still argue whether the jester's presence on the battlefield was a sign of a more humane approach to warfare or a testament to the fact that laughter is a necessary part of the human condition. Even in the middle of a war, you think it's both. You are a man who can make a soldier laugh, and that is a kind of weapon in and of itself. You're back from the war, and you're thinking about your tools, your props, the simple objects that are the raw material of your trade. The bladder stick, a staff with an inflated animal bladder tied to the end, is one of your most treasured possessions. It's a versatile prop. You can use it for slapstick comedy, for mock fights with the knights, or for a playful tap on the king's shoulder. It's a tool of laughter, but it's also a tool of defiance. A whack from a bladder stick is an insult that isn't an insult, a way of getting away with a physical gesture that would get you killed from anyone else. The marotte, a kind of scepter with a carved head of a jester on it, is a different kind of tool. It's a prop, but it's also a symbol. The marotte is a kind of mirror, a grotesque echo of the king's own scepter. It's a subtle mockery of power, a way of saying, "The king may have a scepter, but I have one too, and it's much funnier." The Marotte is your alter ego, a silent companion who always agrees with you, a kind of professional friend in a lonely world. And, of course, there are your juggling balls, your lute, and your silly hat with the bells on it. These are not just objects, they are an extension of you, a part of your professional identity. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters often had a set of tools and props, including the bladder stick and the marotte, that were a key part of their performance and their professional identity. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, in a show of defiance, would have the marotte carved to look like a prominent member of the court, a kind of silent and very public mockery that everyone would pretend not to notice. Historians still argue whether the use of these props was a sign of the jester's childishness or a brilliant form of social commentary. You think it's a bit of both. You are a man who has to play with toys to make a living, but you are also a man who can use those toys to subtly mock the most powerful people in the world. The king has a new obsession, the monastic life. He is spending more and more time with the abbots and the monks, listening to their sermons and their hymns, and you, the jester, are now in the strange position of trying to find humour in a place that is, by its very nature, devoid of it. The monasteries are places of piety, of quiet contemplation, of solemnity. Laughter, in most monastic orders, is a kind of sin, a sign of a worldly distraction. This is a strange and difficult role for you. You have to be funny without being blasphemous, witty without being sacrilegious. You find yourself telling jokes about the weather or the king's eating habits, the kind of safe, anodyne humour that you'd never use in the court. The monks, in their quiet way, are both intrigued and a little repulsed by you. You are a living paradox, a man who is paid to make people laugh in a world that is obsessed with solemnity and silence, but you also find a strange kind of kinship with some of the monks. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some monastic orders, like the Franciscans, were known for their love of humour and their belief that laughter was a gift from God. You'll find a few friars who will sneak a joke to you or laugh at one of your more subtle quips, a kind of secret rebellion against the solemnity of their lives. A mainstream historical fact is that the relationship between the church and laughter was a complicated one, with some theologians arguing that it was a healthy, God-given emotion, and others arguing that it was a sign of a flawed human nature. Historians still argue whether the jester's presence in a monastery was a kind of spiritual test or a necessary antidote to a life of quiet despair. You feel it's a bit of both. You are a man who can bring a little light and joy into a world of darkness and silence, and you are a man who is trying to find a reason to laugh, even when everyone else is trying not to. The king is in a dispute with a neighbouring ruler, and you, the jester, are sent as an unofficial diplomatic messenger. This is a strange and dangerous extension of your duties, and it is a testament to the trust the king has in you. You are not a knight, not a lord, not a diplomat. You are a man in a silly hat with bells on, and you are being sent to carry sensitive information between two rival courts. Your job is to deliver a message, but not in words. You are a living riddle, a professional charade. You might tell a story about a farmer and a wolf that is actually a veiled message about the king's intentions. You might sing a song about a misplaced key that is actually a hint about a secret military strategy. The other ruler, if he is clever, will understand. He will see past the silly clothes and the goofy smile, and he will see you for what you are, a living, breathing, and very, very dangerous message. You are a symbol, a walking piece of coded information. This is a high-stakes game, and you are a professional player. A wrong joke could be interpreted as a sign of aggression. A bad story could be seen as a declaration of war. You have to be perfect, because a mistake could mean a battle that costs thousands of lives. You are a man who can start a war with a single sentence, and you are a man who has to be careful. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters were often used as unofficial diplomatic messengers, as their strange status allowed them to move between courts without arousing suspicion. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters would memorize entire poems or songs that were actually coded messages, a kind of living encryption that was a testament to their incredible memory and wit. Historians still argue whether this role gave the jester more power or just put them in even greater danger. You think it did both, a kind of temporary and terrifying power. The world around you is changing, and you can feel it in the strange, new objects that are showing up in the castle. There are books everywhere now, not just a few rare, handwritten manuscripts, but entire stacks of them, all with the same perfect letters. The invention of printing has changed everything. And you, the man who relies on spoken word, on wit, on performance, are in a new and different world. Your jokes, your stories, your parables, they can now be written down and reproduced. The king can now read a witty book of satires from a French court without having to hire a jester to travel and tell them to him. The court can now read about the great philosophers and thinkers of the age without having to listen to a fool ramble on about them. The printing press has democratized knowledge, and in doing so, it has made you, the professional teller of tales, a little less necessary. This is a quiet, but profound, threat to your existence. Your wit, which was once your most valuable and unique asset, is now just one of many forms of entertainment and knowledge. You are a human library in a world where libraries are now a thing. You are a professional entertainer in a world where everyone can now be entertained by a book. It's a new world, and you are a man of the old one. A mainstream historical fact is that the invention of the printing press in the 15th century revolutionized the spread of knowledge and information in Europe, leading to a decline in oral traditions and professions like yours. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of the first books to be printed were joke books and humorous poems, a testament to the fact that the need for laughter and wit was as strong as the need for knowledge. Historians still argue whether the printing press was a force for good or a kind of professional death sentence for the jester. You feel it was both a glorious thing for humanity and a terrible thing for you. You're still in your room, and you're thinking about the plays and the poems that are now showing up in the court. The king has hired a playwright, a man who writes beautiful, terrible, and funny stories. And you, the jester, are now watching your life being played out on a stage. You see yourself in the fools of literature, in the immortalized jesters of Shakespeare and other great playwrights. You recognize yourself in their words. You see the same loneliness, the same cleverness, the same subtle mockery of power. You see your wit, your pain, and your peculiar position in the world being played out by an actor on a stage. You are no longer just a man in a silly hat. You are a character, a symbol, a literary device. And while this is, in a way, a kind of immortality, it is also a kind of death. You are no longer a person. You are an idea. You are a professional fool who has become a symbol of foolishness, a living paradox who has become a literary archetype. The very thing that you are, your unique, strange life, is now being turned into a story, a fiction. A mainstream historical fact is that the jester archetype was heavily used in plays and literature, particularly in the Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, as a way to subvert social norms and comment on society without direct retribution. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Shakespeare's fool in King Lear is considered one of the most complex and profound characters in all of literature. A testament to the idea that the jester was not just a comic figure but a kind of moral compass. Historians still argue whether the literary fool was an accurate representation of the real-life jester or a romanticized version of a very grim reality. You know, the truth is a bit of both. Your reality is far from romantic, but the idea of you, the symbol of you, is something that will last forever. You're alone again, and you're thinking about the nature of your craft, the fundamental human need that you serve. You are a professional laugh maker, a man who has devoted his entire life to the role of laughter in society. You've seen laughter as a weapon, a shield, a balm, and a social lubricant. You've seen it diffuse a tense political situation. You've seen it lift the spirits of a soldier on the battlefield, and you've seen it bring a king back from the depths of despair. Laughter, you realize, is a powerful and necessary part of the human condition. You are a man who has to make people laugh, even when you don't feel like it. You are a man who has to be a source of joy in a world of pain. This is the great irony and the great power of your profession. You are not a king, not a knight, not a priest. You are a jester, And you have a kind of power that none of them have, the power to make people laugh. And in that laughter, there is a kind of freedom, a kind of release, a kind of truth. A mainstream historical fact is that laughter, and the profession of a jester, was seen by some philosophers and theologians as a necessary release, a kind of social safety valve that allowed people to cope with the harsh realities of life. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some cultures believed that laughter could ward off evil spirits and bring good luck, a kind of magical protection that was a part of your performance. Historians still argue whether the jester's humour was a way for the nobles to laugh at the peasants or a way for the jester to be a voice for the voiceless. You feel it's a bit of both. You are a man who can speak for the peasants, but you are also a man who has to laugh at them to survive. It's a cruel joke, and you are the one who has to tell it. You've grown older, your bones ache, your back is sore, and your voice, once a sharp and booming instrument of wit, is now a little hoarse. The king, your patron for so many years, is looking a little tired himself. You are both men of an old world, a world that is quickly fading, and you are now faced with a new and terrifying reality, the lack of jesters' retirement plans. There is no pension for a fool, there is no savings account, there is no guild to take care of you. Your life, which was a constant performance, is now a slow, agonizing process of becoming obsolete. You can no longer juggle as well as you used to. You can no longer tumble without a searing pain in your back. Your wit, once sharp as a razor, is now a little dulled by age and fatigue. The king, in his kindness, has not yet fired you, but he has hired a new, younger fool, a man whose jokes are fresher, whose tumbles are more daring, and whose voice is not yet weary with age. You are a living reminder of your own mortality, a professional past his prime. This is the great, unwritten part of your job description. You have no safety net, you have no family to take care of you. You are, in a sense, a man who has outlived his purpose. The king, in his kindness, might give you a small room and a few scraps of food, but you are no longer a part of the court. You are a ghost, a reminder of a life that you once lived, a life that is now over. A mainstream historical fact is that many jesters and court entertainers, once they were too old to perform, were cast out of the court and left to fend for themselves, with no source of income or support. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, in their later years, would become street performers or beggars, using their old skills to make a few coins. Historians still argue whether this was a final, tragic humiliation or a kind of professional freedom. You think it was both, a final act of professional desperation, a last, desperate attempt to make someone, anyone, laugh. You are standing in the great hall, the same one you've stood in for years, but it feels different now. The vast space, the soaring ceilings, the massive stone pillars, they all feel a little less grand, a little less impressive. You are no longer a part of the vibrant, living energy of this place. You are a ghost, a professional memory, and you are feeling a strange kind of smallness in this grandiose place. This is the truth of the grandiose castle versus the humble jester. The castle is a symbol of power, of permanence, of a world that is designed to last forever. Its stone walls are a testament to the might of the king, and its towering arches are a sign of his wealth. And you, the jester, are a man who has none of that. You are a man who can be cast out with a single word. You are an ephemeral thing, a fleeting moment of joy in a world of serious, permanent things. You are a man who can never be a part of this place. Not truly. You are just a temporary fixture, a man who lives in the shadows of a great and terrible place. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval castles were not just homes, but also symbols of power, wealth, and military might, a physical embodiment of the ruler's authority. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that jesters, with their unique position, were often the only ones who could make a joke about the castle itself, a kind of architectural satire that was a way of humanizing the cold, imposing stone walls. Historians still argue whether the jester's presence in these castles was a kind of professional irony or a testament to the fact that even in the most serious of places, there is always room for a little humour. You think it was both, a kind of beautiful and terrible irony. You're a man who can laugh at a castle, but you're also a man who has to be careful not to get lost in its vast and empty halls. You're sitting in a small, quiet corner of the great hall, watching the younger fool perform. He's good, he's quick, he's not you, and you are feeling a strange kind of peace. You are no longer in the spotlight, you are no longer the center of attention. You are a man in a silly hat who can now just sit and watch the world go by, and as you sit there, your mind drifts to your legacy in modern times. You see yourself in the faces of the street performers, the stand-up comedians, the late-night hosts, and the political satirists. You see your wit, your irreverence, and your ability to speak truth to power in their performances. You are the professional rebel, the man who lives outside the rules, and your spirit, you realize, has not died. It has just evolved. The jester is no longer a man in a funny hat. He is a man in a suit, a woman with a microphone, a person with a blog. The tools have changed, but the fundamental human need has not. The world still needs a fool to tell it the truth. A mainstream historical fact is that the jester archetype has endured in modern entertainment and political discourse, with many comedians and satirists seeing themselves as a modern-day equivalent of the medieval fool. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the word jester is still used in a professional context, with some modern-day entertainers and performers calling themselves jesters as a kind of professional homage to the past. Historians still argue whether the modern satirist is a genuine successor to the jester or just a romanticized version of a very grim and difficult reality. You know, the truth is a bit of both. The life of a modern satirist is far less dangerous than yours, but the spirit, the fundamental human need to laugh at power, is still the same. The king has died, a new king has been crowned, a young man who does not know you and has no use for a professional relic from a bygone era. He has his own fool, a younger, fresher, and more modern version of you. You are now officially retired, you have a small damp room in the castle, and a meagre ration of food. But you are no longer a part of the court. You are a ghost, a professional memory, and you are feeling a terrible kind of fear. This is the jester's greatest fear, the fear of being discarded and forgotten. You are a man whose entire existence was tied to his ability to make someone laugh, and now, that ability is gone. You are no longer needed. You are no longer a part of the show. You are just an old man in a silly hat with bells on, a reminder of a life that is now over. This is a much more terrible kind of death than a physical one. A physical death is final. This is a slow, agonizing process of becoming invisible, of no longer mattering. You are a man who has lost his purpose. And a man who has lost his purpose is a man who has nothing. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters, once their patron died, were often left without a job or a home, as their personal relationships with the monarch were the only thing that kept them employed. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, in a final act of professional desperation, would try to sneak into the new king's court and perform a kind of tragic and often humiliating attempt to reclaim their old life. Historians still argue whether this final act of desperation was a sign of a professional's love for their craft or a testament to the fact that they had no other skills and no other way to survive. You think it was both, a kind of beautiful and terrible final act. You've been given your final orders. The new king, in a moment of kindness, has decided to send you to a small, quiet monastery in the countryside, a place where you can live out your days in peace. This is the end of the jester's story. You are taking your final bow, your final exit from the stage. Your motley, once a vibrant and joyful uniform, now feels heavy and tired. The bells on your cap, once a source of professional pride, are now a source of professional shame. They are a constant reminder of the life that you once lived, a life that is now over. You are walking away from the castle, from the great halls, from the feasts and the tournaments and the wars. You are walking away from a life of constant performance and constant fear. And as you walk, you are feeling a strange mix of emotions. You are feeling a profound sadness for the loss of a life that you loved. But you are also feeling a strange kind of peace. The pressure is off. The constant need to be funny is gone. You are no longer a professional entertainer. You are just a man. And that, you realize, is a kind of freedom you have never known. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters, in their later years, would sometimes be given a small pension or a place to live by a former patron, a kind of final act of kindness for a life of service. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some jesters, in a final act of professional irony, would try to sneak into the new king's court and perform a kind of tragic and often humiliating attempt to reclaim their old life. Historians still argue whether this final act of desperation was a sign of a professional's love for their craft or a testament to the fact that they had no other skills and no other way to survive. You think it was both. A kind of beautiful and terrible final act. You've arrived at the monastery, a quiet, peaceful place surrounded by green hills and the distant sound of a river. The monks, in their simple robes, are kind and welcoming, and you are feeling a strange kind of peace. This is the enduring mystery of the fool. You are a man who has devoted his entire life to laughter, and you are now in a place of quiet contemplation and silence. You are a man who has made a living by being a paradox, and you are now in a place where all paradoxes are resolved. You are a man who has lost his purpose, but you are a man who has found a new one. Your job is no longer to make people laugh. Your job is now to just be, to sit in the sun, to listen to the birds sing, and to watch the world go by. The bells on your cap, which you have not worn in months, are now a distant memory, a faint echo of a life that is now over. You are a man who has spent his entire life in a crowd, and you are now alone, and you are feeling a kind of peace you have never known. You are a man who can now just be, and that, you realize, is a kind of freedom you have never known. Historians still argue whether the Jester was a professional entertainer or a kind of social philosopher. You know the truth is a bit of both. You are a man who has seen the world from the top and from the bottom. And you are a man who has learned the truth about human nature. You are a man who can now just be, and that, you realize, is a kind of freedom you have never known. The king has forgotten you, the court has forgotten you, and the world has forgotten you, and you are feeling a strange kind of peace. You're now drifting off. The story is fading away. The images of the past are softening, becoming like old, worn tapestries in a forgotten hall. You're leaving the clamour of the court, the sharp jingle of the bells, and the ever-present weight of the past behind you. The cold stone of the castle, the loud, boisterous feasts, the strange, peculiar life of a professional fool. It's all becoming a distant whisper. You can feel the quietness, a gentle hush settling over everything. The jokes, the tumbles, the secrets you carried, they are no longer yours to hold. They belong to the silence now. Your mind is slowing down. The images are becoming soft at the edges, and the sounds are fading to a faint, soothing hum. You've had a long journey, and it's time to rest. You can let go of the stories, let go of the kings and the castles, let go of the pressure to be funny. You're a person now, not a performance, just a person, and you can finally, just be. Let the past fade into the background, let the thoughts just drift away. There's nothing to do now, nothing to worry about, just the soft darkness and the quiet end of script. Sweet dreams.